Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad nothing happened yesterday to stop you coming back today. Welcome all. The first session this morning is entitled One Crowded Hour. And it's going to consist of an analysis of Australian operations and then a consideration of the Viet Cong infrastructure in Buckridge province. Sort of getting out of the clouds of strategy and down into some analysis of what actually happened. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Bob Hall, who has, like a number of people here, been both a soldier and an academic, served as an infantry platoon commander in Vietnam, and served in the army for some time after that. Following that, became an academic at ADFA and has conducted quite a lot of Vietnam-related research. One thing I would comment on is that he's been involved in Operation Wandering Souls, a project aimed at assisting Vietnam with discovering the burial sites of Vietnamese soldiers killed in action by Australians and New Zealanders, and returning documents and artefacts to the people who actually own them. He's also a published author of Combat Battalion, about the 8th Battalion in Vietnam, and co-author of The Search for Tactical Success in Vietnam. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Bob to come and talk to us now about an analysis of Australian operations. Thanks, Michael.
This analysis is done by a research team, so I'm not entirely to blame myself. You can send praise to me, but if you've got some complaints, send them to the other guy. I just want to run through, and I know that a lot of people in the audience today will be very familiar with this stuff, but I'll just run through locating where Buckridge is and what its strategic significance was. On this map of South Vietnam, you can see those two goose eggs there are the areas of most intense fighting that particularly the United States military was involved in. In those two areas alone, about a third of US casualties were caused. So you can see that the fighting in those two areas was particularly severe, particularly heavy. They're both very important. The northern province is obviously very close to North Vietnam, and that southern circle shows the provinces that were up against the Cambodian border near the Parents Peak and between the Parents Peak and Saigon. So very strategically important, and that's why those areas were such killing zones, for want of a better term. Tobruk province, located well away from those areas. So you can see that even from the strategic point of view, the Australian effort concentrated in Tobruk province was going to be a different sort of war than the one that the Americans were fighting. This is Tobruk province. Tobruk province had a population of about 125,000 Vietnamese. Most of them were located in the southern areas circled there, and that was also the area of major food and rice production. But there were some outlying villages that were fairly large, Nguyen Ngoc in the east and Biennial in the north. There are also a few minor villages scattered along Route 2, which runs north through the province, and also along Route 15, which runs to the west towards Saigon. The province was ideal, I should say, for an insurgency. It had a number of mountain features, or hill features, that are shown there in circles. Maytao Mountains in the northeast, the Nuading and Nuiji High features, and of course the infamous Long High Mountains or Windham Secret Zone in the south. Those were riddled with caves, covered in boulders and jungle. The caves were provided the enemy with terrific security. They were impervious to bombing and artillery, so they were ideal for conduct of insurgencies. They're also located close, the two lower ones, Buckridge and Biennial, also located ideally close to the population centres where the insurgents could sally out from their caves and attack the local RF and PF bases and fossilise, collect food and intelligence from their supporters in the towns. Up in the top left is the Adjunct area, which was a very densely jungled area, ideal again for guerrilla operations. There were two large manoeuvre areas, divided by River 2, mostly jungle covered, patches of open terrain, more open terrain, but mostly jungle covered, and they were ideal for the insurgents or the guerrillas to use as manoeuvre areas to escape Australian patrols. Let's just see if this laser pointer will work, and if my old hands are steady enough to know. I was going to point out 1ADF base at Biennial, right in the middle of the province, and the 1ASG base down near the city of Buckridge in the south. Every time a 1ADF patrol had a contact with the enemy, a contact report was created. Initially, the contact report was radioed into company headquarters and up the chain, eventually finding its way to battalion headquarters. The initial radio contact report was very simple, very quick, just the number of enemy, the location they'd gone, whether there were any casualties, a very brief description of what had happened. But once the patrol commander returned to Nui Data after the operation, could be 3, 4, 5 weeks later, he was required to complete a contact after action report. You see an example here. The contact after action report required him to answer about 30 questions. Date, time, place, the unit that was involved, the strength of the unit, the estimated strength of the enemy, a description of what happened in a bit more detail, who fired first, the number of shots fired, what weapons fired, what number of rounds, what casualties were sustained by him, what casualties were inflicted on the enemy, what the terrain was like, who saw who first, and so on. So quite a detailed report. And so, here we go. Quite a detailed report, and of course there are thousands of those reports emanating from all of the contacts that 1ADF had. So we took those contact reports and digitised, or basically typed up all of those contact reports into a massive Excel spreadsheet with about 4,000 rows and 30 columns, so that we could analyse the data statistically. And so we've got 4,500 combat incidents, of which about 3,909 were contacts. The others were things like friendly fire incidents, artillery and mortar incidents, mines, and so on. And as I said, up to 30 bits of information on each. Some contact reports weren't fully completed, they were pretty sketchy. Others were quite comprehensive and involved multiple pages of description of what happened. So once we built our database and we handed it over to our IT guy and our GIS expert, they were able to plot the contacts on maps of Tobruk province. And you can see on this map that the contacts are concentrated in particular areas. You'll see up in the north of the province around what was called the Courtney Rubber area. There's a concentration up in the north of the province. You can see over in that Hut-Zip area there's a very dense number of contacts. Also, you'll see, so down here, see if I can point these out. This is Biennial, which I think was mentioned yesterday as one of the settler villages from Catholics who come down from the north. This, on the other hand, down here, hidden under these dots, is Wahong, and hidden under some of these dots here is the village of Datbo. Both Wahong and Datbo were controlled by the enemy, very heavily influenced by the enemy. But you can see that Biennial stands in contrast to those. It's kind of living in a little island of peace up there. It was very well organised and run by a very powerful priest who had a very good grip on his community and had it very well structured and organised to defend itself. I visited Biennial some years ago now and saw the priest's grave, and somebody had placed fresh flowers on it, so it's still strongly remembered in the area. But also looking at that map, you can also see some linear arrangements of contacts. So there's a line that goes up here, for example. So that's the Tobruk River, and you can see how those geographic features influence where contacts are going to happen. So by doing this mapping, you can get a feel for what's happening in the province. So one of the things that we were able to do, or identify, I guess, was the difference between what we call the big battles or the landmark battles and the contacts. The big battles are the battles like Longtan, Bribey, very along the end in Czech, Coral, Balmoral, Binbar, Nuile. We say that there's about 16 of those big battles, but you could, depending on how you wanted to identify them, you could say that there's somewhere between 10 or 20. Well, the point is, there are not many of them. So we say about 16. They're all carefully planned by the enemy, and they're planned over long periods, sometimes up to about 2 months. When we were at, my Duntroon classmates were at Duntroon, we were always told you've got to keep the tempo of operations up, because every hour you leave between the time that you've arrived at the problem and you've launched your assault, the enemy is preparing the position and making it harder for you. But in these cases, the enemy is taking potentially months to prepare for battle. So they're very carefully planned. The enemy also prepares the battlefield in advance of the battle. He does things like building bunker systems to protect his forces from artillery and airstrike, laying communication cable, moving his logistics support people, his medical evacuation teams, for example, into the battle area in advance of the battle. He's got to do that because he lacks armour, tube artillery, air power, he's got very poor communications, he's got bad logistics, so he's got to get whatever advantages he can get. And one of the advantages is to prepare the battlefield and then lure us into that area that he's prepared. And that's what he calls luring the tiger from the mountains. And many of those big battles result in one ADF being lured into an area that he's prepared for battle. That happens in Longtan, happens in Off-Bribey, happens in Biennial, happens at Nui Lay, for example. The enemy seeks a political as well as a military outcome in these battles. In fact, the political outcome is probably more important to him than the military outcome. He's got very experienced commanders. He knows when he launches these battles that he's going to cop a pacing. And therefore, we've got to ask ourselves, well, why does he do it? He does it mainly for the political reasons. They're all initiated by the VCPABN, these battles. So these are the battles that the enemy wanted to have. He wants to have these battles primarily for political reasons. And the loss ratio is therefore irrelevant because he's fighting for a different thing than we are. We're trying to destroy him, but he's trying to achieve a political advantage, a political benefit for himself. So that stands in contrast with the contacts. There's approximately 3,890 contacts by 1 ATF in Tobruk province. They're very small scale. The average enemy strength in a contact is 6 enemy or less. There are a lot of contacts with 1 or 2 enemy. There's minimal warning. An Australian patrol is moving through the jungle. They see an enemy patrol. There's a few shots fired, and the fight is on. So there's no warning, no way of planning for what's going to happen, apart from encouraging or training soldiers in their battle drills. So no warning and no planning. They're very short range and short duration. They're usually at less than 20 metres range in the jungle or at night on the paddy field, and they usually last less than 10 metres, about 10 minutes. They usually last less than 10 minutes. That's important because it means that we can't really apply our advantage in heavy weapons. So mostly these are battles that are infantry on infantry. There's little indirect fire support used except for channeling fire or illumination of smoke, for example. But there's very little use of indirect fire support for killing effect. In past wars, artillery has been the queen of the king of the battlefield because of its killing effect. In this war, in these contacts, it's the infantry that's the king of that. There's no political benefit for the VC or BADN in these minor contacts. In fact, they're in some ways politically negative for it, particularly if they happen near a village. The village people can hear that there's a battle going on, and the next day they learn that there's been a contact, an ambush, an Australian ambush outside the village, and last night the VC didn't break in and get their resupplies. So they may see a political advantage or political disadvantage, I should say, in not being able to execute their entry in the village. And overwhelmingly, these contacts are initiated by 1 ATF. 1 ATF initiates these contacts in about 8% of cases. So these are battles that the enemy doesn't want. He would much prefer us to leave him alone, to get on with his small movements, his resupply missions, his reconnaissances, his moving from point A to point B around the province, his liaison efforts around the province, small groups of people, moving from one unit to another. He'd much prefer to be able to do that without interference. So he doesn't want these battles. And the loss ratio, therefore, is useful in determining how these contacts unfold. So we can compare the big battles and the contacts in a collective way. And you can see the left-hand table there about, left-hand column there about 16 big battles. Collectively, about 8,000 enemy soldiers are involved, 4,000 ADF involved, and that means that the enemy is achieving local superiority over us. There's about 1,000 enemy casualties resulting from those big battles and 287 Australian casualties. But you can see in the contacts that there's obviously many more, as I said, 3,890. There's a massive number of enemy involved in the contacts collectively. An even huger number of 1ATF are involved, and we are achieving local superiority over the enemy. And about 4 times more enemy casualties are inflicted in the contacts, and 4 times more 1ATF casualties result as well. So this is where most of the damage is being done to us and to the enemy in Tobruk province. The big battles are the ones that all the history books write about, because they've got names and they're fairly simple and clear, they're happening on the day and you know where they happen, so on. But these are not really making much of an impact on the enemy. This is doing much more damage to the infantry, to the enemy, and much more damage to us. So there's got to be a way of understanding those minor contacts. And the problem with them is that they appear chaotic. They're all over the place. There's some in the north, some in the south, daylight, daytime, night time, near the villages, away from the villages, near rivers, away from the rivers. It's very difficult to get a handle on them and describe them, unless you do what I think we've done is the way to go about it. But they fall into these 4 major combat tasks. Patrol contacts, where an Australian patrol is moving through the jungle and bumps into an enemy patrol. Ambushes of the enemy. Bunker system attacks. Bunker systems were enemy camps where the enemy was dug in and had prepared fire lanes, defences in depth, mutually supporting bunkers, often heat prepared booby traps and mines, command detonated mines on the approaches to its bunker systems, so very, very tough targets to attack. And finally, security and defence of position contacts. Those are where we have gone into a harbour, a night harbour, or a stationary position, and they're probed by enemy patrol. So those can each be analysed further. But before I do, this is the frequency breakup of those patrols. And this table is a little bit, well, I want to stress that the figures under the US Army there are a bit rubbery. They come from the Pentagon papers, and so they were presumably used to inform what was but they were very early in the campaign, and I think that they're a bit overblown, basically. But they do indicate that the US Army was fighting in a different way than we were, probably because it was fighting those big battles that I mentioned earlier. So you can see that 1ATF is fighting the war in a different way, because we're fighting an insurgency rather than the big battles that the Americans are fighting. So we're being ambushed by the enemy only 2% of times, whereas the Americans are being ambushed around about 23% of times. We're doing ambushing of the enemy 34% of our contacts. You can go on down the table there and see the contrast. The 3 highlighted bands there, the highlighted in green, are types of contact that are initiated by the enemy. And ideally, if you're a commando organising the way you want to fight, you want to have very low numbers in those highlighted rows and very high numbers in the non-highlighted rows. Because you want to be doing the initiating of contact, not having the enemy do it. And you can see how we have about 78% of our contacts have been initiated by us, on ATF, and it's the reverse is the case in the US. But I just want to re-stress that the American figures are a bit wonky. Okay, so patrol contacts, there are over 1,000 of those. The ATF fires first in about 78% of patrol contacts. And when we fire first, we inflict a loss ratio of 1:9. So we lose one casualty and the enemy generally loses about 9. When BABN fires first, the loss ratio is 1:14. 1:1.4. So when the BABN has a patrol contact, they achieve a benefit, but it's not as high as the benefit we are able to achieve. Ambush contacts. We ambushed the enemy in 1,077 cases. About half of those were at night. The enemy ambushed 1 ATF in 103 cases. 1 ATF opened fire in 96% of its ambushes, as you'd expect. Very high percentage. They prepared the ground, they set up claymore mines, lopsided machine guns, waited for the enemy to arrive, and in 96% of cases they initiated contact. 1 ATF suffers 1 casualty for every 10 inflicted in those ambushes. When the enemy ambushes 1 ATF, they suffer 1 casualty for every 2.5 inflicted. So again, even though they're initiating those ambushes, they're not able to capitalise on that benefit as much as we are. Bunker system contacts, as I mentioned, very, very nasty battles, but luckily only 236 of them. They're about 6% of all 1 ATF contacts. Some battalions were very unlucky to serve during the period of major bunker system attacks in 1969. I think 5 RAR had 44 bunker system attacks. 8 RAR had only 8. I was in 8 RAR and I'm very pleased to have been in 8 RAR. But they cause 45% of all 1 ATF combat casualties, so you can see how serious and nasty those particular battles were. And because these are serious and nasty battles, they generally lasted a long time, and these are the ones where artillery and air power, if it was going to be used in a contact, was going to be used in these ones to have the effect. But even so, often assaulting 1 ATF platoon would have to withdraw to enable the artillery or air power to be applied to the system. And often when that happened, the enemy would also withdraw and the artillery or air power would hit an empty bunker system. 1 ATF, despite the fact that these bunker systems had sentries and people watching out for approaching enemy, 1 ATF opens fire on them in about 82% of bunker contacts. 1 ATF loss ratio was 1 to 1.1, so a very even exchange of casualties. The enemy has advantage. He's prepared these bunker systems and they give him a massive advantage. And the infantry firepower that 1 ATF was able to carry in the battle isn't sufficient to overcome that advantage. And so often 1 ATF had in these bunker systems has to call for artillery and air support and armour support to deal with the problem. These ones are security or defensive position contacts, approximately 800 of those. Mainly they're probes of positions at night, mainly harbour positions where a firm or a company has pulled itself into a night harbour, and that's been probed. There are a few probes of fire support-based perimeters and so on, but interestingly, within Foot Crew Brothers, there are no attacks on, other than attacks by fire, no ground results on 1ATF fire support bases. 1ATF fires in about 64% of these cases, and the loss ratio is what you can see here, one casualty for every 2.75 enemy casualties. So 1ATF dominates in all four contact types because we had superior bushcraft. We patrolled silently. We had very skilled scouts, forward scouts, good battlefield technique. We had superior shooting skills. We were able to go back to doing that after operations and refresh our shooting. Whereas the enemy had a problem with ammunition supply and also making too much noise that would attract our attention. We were not reliant on tracks where the enemy generally was, so that made them very vulnerable to ambushes. And finally, we, as you can see in that earlier slide, we achieved local numerical superiority overwhelmingly in these contacts. So Ho Chi Minh said this, I'll read that. So we, in fact, were able to nibble with the enemy. We were able to attack him. The one area that he achieved substantial success was us stumbling on mines, and that's been covered by Greg Lockhart in his terrific talk about the minefield. So, any questions?
Yeah, Bob, I'm curious, can you go back to the slide where you showed the total casualties based on the two different engagement types, the big battles versus the 3898 unanticipated or undesired? Yeah, that one. I'm wondering about those bottom two figures, enemy casualties and first ATF casualties, because it seems to me that the ratio is pretty much the same, whether it's the big battles or contacts, in terms of the ATF loss rate to the enemy loss rate. It's still 1 to 4, 287 to 1,000, 1,147 to 4,480. One enemy loss, 4 enemy losses to each of the ATF losses.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do you get to the 1 to 10 ratio that you described with over 1,000 of those? Is that when you say casualties in the 1 to 10 ratio for the first ATF, are you referring to killed in action? Or does that include wounded in action? Because if it's 1 to 10 ratio, then the number should be a lot higher in terms of context, because 1 to 10 would be 10,000.
I'm not sure when you say 1 to 10.
The loss ratio that you referred to before, in terms of the slide where you give the 1 to 10 ratio for the first ATF losses versus the enemy losses, further down in the slides, when you talk about the first ATF.
1 to 10 is there. 1 to 10 is in ambushing.
Right, but that's out of 1,000 of those 3,898.
Yeah.
So if there's one casualty for every 10 inflicted, I'm curious what those numbers are in the previous slide. Because that's a huge difference, I mean, 1 to 10 ratio.
Well, yeah, but the others are much less, of course.
I see.
So, for example...
and these are killed in action, the casualties that you're talking about here.
Yeah, I can't recall whether they're actually killed in action or killed and wounded. off the top of my head. But, you know, if you go into, say, bunker systems, you're getting 1%.
I see, gotcha. Any weapons recovered? Any bodies or weapons recovered in these?
Yeah.
The 3898?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was the intelligence cell, or whatever existed to provide feedback, was it accomplishing the best outcome on its analyses? Were they up to this statistical approach to this degree, or was it indifferent?
Those contact reports, one of the recipients of each of those contact reports was the Field Operations Research Service that was in Vietnam, and they were doing statistical analysis of the operations, but it was very patchy, and they came up often with very trivial answers. For example, I remember reading one report that said that, you know, we've studied all these contact reports, and what we've learned is that hand grenades are very useful in bunker system attacks. You know, you could have stuck a microphone under any infantryman's nose and said, you know, what you use in bunker system attacks, and he was in hand grenades. They did come up with some useful stuff. Useful analysis of the data that did shape operations. ADFA, for example, looked very intensively at bunker systems, and because it was arriving just after that period, the peak period of bunker system attacks in 1969, ADFA arrived in Vietnam in November 1969. And the CEO of ADFA was very concerned about the problem of attacking bunker systems. And so he decided that what he was going to do was try and avoid bunker systems as much as possible and concentrate very heavily on ambushing. And that, when you get into individual, you can do this sort of analysis with individual units as well. When you get into that, you can see that ADFA has emerges from the end of the war with a very low casualty rate, only 18 dead, and had a very high number of ambushes and a very good loss ratio in terms of ambushing.
Ancillary to that, has anyone been able, at the time or now, partition the amount of time the enemy devoted to its administration, let's call it, all the things except contact and big battle, how much time they devoted to their administration? Is there a rough number for that?
I've not seen any research into that.
You list 16 big battles, which include, and your criteria includes months and months of preparation. And I wouldn't deny that Balmoral and Coral were big battles in Australian terms, but from the enemy's point of view, there was no preparation by them. We were inserted on top of them, whether we wanted to be there or not. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that's a miscategorisation. Big battle, yes, but the statistics are really not relevant to what you're trying to draw out of it.
No, I agree with Coles and Balmoral. No, but there were, one of the characteristics of almost all the others is that there was a lengthy period of preparation for it. But Cole and Balmoral are exceptions. And, you know, that's what happened. Yeah.
Bob, this is searchable online, is it, this database?
Look, we put all of this data onto our interactive battle map on the Australia's Vietnam War website. But unfortunately, that's offline at the moment.
So it has been online. I think I came across it once. Okay, thanks.
Unfortunately, we've had to take it offline. We're doing work on it, and we're hoping to get it back online at some point. But we don't have any funding And so I'm relying on my IT guys' braces and his whatever free time he can get from his family. Yeah.
I was just wondering whether you've got any comment about the experience and the learning from all these engagements and so on. For example, did we have to change the training that we had before in sort of small tactics like ambush drills, harbours, patrolling, advancing formations, that sort of stuff. Did any of that evolve in light of the evidence of what actually happened?
Look, I think minor tactics changed during the course of the war, and I don't know that was necessarily the result of formal analysis of the data, but it certainly changed within battalions. I mean, one of the traditional responses to an ambush was that the ambushed force was supposed to turn into the ambush and assault it immediately. That was a policy that was designed when people were using bolt-action rifles and they weren't any Claymore mines. But when Claymore mines and AK-47s were introduced on the battlefield, doing that was no longer sensible. And it was also impossible because the first thing that happened when a shot rang out in Vietnam was that everybody got on the ground. I don't think many platoons would have done the traditional assault into the ambush, for example, when they fought in the ambush.
I think we've reached the point where the clock has marched on us. Thank you, Bob, very much.